Hello. Good evening, all. On behalf of Applied Theatre India Foundation and Indian Council for Cultural Relations, I welcome you all to this two-day first ever virtual conference on role of applied theatre in Indian society. This is our 13th session. We are glad to welcome our speaker, Dr. Sarah Sadler from USA. She is an assistant professor of theatre at Baruch College in New York City. Her scholarly work investigates the role of theatre and performance in the transnational professional economy. Her book project, Performing Corporate Bodies, Multinational Theatre in Global India, is an ethnography of theatre-based workplace training in corporate India, where she conducted research with corporations, training consultancies, theater groups, business schools, and artists and activists from 2012 to 2019. I request Dr. to present her thoughts on improving performance dramatically applied theater for corporate development in neoliberal India. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Vaishali. Okay, let me try to share my screen. Just 1 minute. You can see my screen, yeah?
Yep.
All right. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so so today my paper is going to talk about the phenomenon of applied theater for corporate development in India, which I call corporate theater. And so just to give you a sense of first what corporate theater is, it is an international management trend that features the use of dramatic techniques and simulations and games in business training and development. So these workshops are primarily aimed at installing soft skills, right, like communication and team building and leadership, now viewed as really essential to worker performance in the global work economy. And in India, corporate theater is really viewed by corporates as a refreshing and fun and entertaining alternative to traditional PowerPoint learning formats, which may restrict opportunities for employees to discuss and debate workplace problems and ideas, right? So rather than sit and passively sort of observe and absorb a case study, facilitators and actors in corporate theater bring case studies to life, right? Through dramatic role play and humor and gesture and improvisation and all of these things that we associate with performance, right? I studied the landscape of corporate theater in India from around 2012 to 2019 in cities including Gurgaon, Delhi, Noida, Pune, Bangalore, Mumbai, basically all around, where I sort of sought to really understand why and how theater is used in the workplace. And so the following is a snippet from my book in progress titled Performing Corporate Bodies, Multinational Theater in Global India. And in this paper, I'm lifting a snippet from my third chapter of the book, where I am attempting to theorize what makes corporate theater so fun, right, from a performance perspective, right? And here's just a little bit about what corporate theater is. So corporate theater is fun. Trainers claim that drama is effective because it serves as a refreshing counterpoint to dry and alienating lecture and PowerPoint learning formats. As one trainer told me in 2016, oh yeah, HR, they totally suck up to humor. One thing that's the most important, they all want humor and they all want messaging, as long as it's fun. Corporate theater is also fun in the sense that it makes extensive use of humor and spectacle. In 2018, a few years later, another trainer based in Chennai described his workshop style as the following. Then I give them sort of exploratory, highly dramatic situations like traders in a gangster's den or black magic healing ritual in a remote village. We give them lots of chances to get out of their corporate, and we can get into some very unusual costumes and makeup and, tantrics and bones and skulls and gunfights. Lastly, corporate theater is fun because employees find these workshops immensely enjoyable. When I would ask employees to describe their training experience in interviews I would conduct, their responses often mentioned how much fun they had, alongside an expression of relief about not being at work. And, this seemed ironic to me as a researcher because to me, corporate theater is an activity shadowed by implicit and explicit management demands in both blatant and concealed ways. But in another sense, I understood what employees would mean when they would express how much fun they had in training. I too laughed at the scenarios. I anticipated how each audience would react to the sometimes ridiculous skits that would be portrayed. And I delighted in the moments of unexpected tension and spontaneity that reveal corporate theater as a participatory performance practice latent with creative possibility. So in this paper, I turn to failure as an element intrinsic to corporate theater training and applied theater in corporate development that invites us to consider both its redemptive promises and also its unsettling disappointments. And I suggest that corporate theater is fun because it fails. It fails to deliver the transformational employee mindset shift it promises. It fails to provoke large-scale organizational change, and it entirely fails at taking itself seriously. And it fails vis-a-vis the same machineries it endorses: humor, improvisation, affect, and all those other slippery characteristics of performance that cause trainings to veer off script and remain constantly open to unpredictability, risk, threat, and impulse. But I argue that it is precisely in assessing corporate theater's capacity to fail through performance that we can understand what I call its covert pedagogies. The ways that trainings instruct employees to suppress and repress institutional contradictions, the ways corporate theater breeds temporary forms of contestation in the face of power, and the ways corporate theater lays bare the exhausting nature of neoliberal mantras of happiness, productivity, achievement, and success. So in organizational studies, scholars use failure management as a strategy for alleviating loss, right? But scholars of performance approach failure in reverse as sort of the opposite, right? As a threshold to complex zones of imagination and invention that can unshackle our spirits and our bodies from economic rationalities of productivity and success that often drive our everyday lives and our personal lives. Quote, failure is a point of transformation, Margaret Weary and Rosen O'Gorman write, when a goal, an outcome, a future, a subject, an institution becomes something other than itself, end quote. Failure is the currency of the weak. It counters authority and charts alternative worlds of resilience and rebellion, even as it nourishes forms of social power that keep institutional mandates in place. So how do we map failure? For those of us in theater and performance, it can be traced to terrains of experience, movement, and feeling that underlay all artistic practice, generating individual and collective impulses not always tethered only to global cultural hegemonies of life and labor. And humor is central to the political potential of failure. From Bakhtin's Carnivalesque to Brecht's use of comedy as political pedagogy, performance scholars have always been empathic about comedy's relationship to power. As Maddie Schutzman has written, humor has the power to reject the hard lines incurred by polarities and point to a surplus, an excess that seems to hover around us, even as we bunker up into our separate identities. Humor, like play, lubricates a third way in which skepticism and belief coexist and makes it possible to live with systemic contradictions that inflict their gnarly enigmas, mess with our emotions, and instigate hesitation and decision. And the subversive potential of humor becomes especially evident in contexts of cultural colonization, where comedy has become a language to refute Western negations of cultural life. And this has been well documented in India, where the Natya Sastra names Hasya one of the 8 rasas of dramatic performance. And in colonial India, for example, indigenous satirical traditions played a key role in voicing divides between imperial visions of modernity and the cultural dimensions of national tradition. And the political practice of comedy in India has carried into the post-globalization present, where an increasingly barefaced and vitriolic Hindu nationalism has been met with the rise of novels and plays and TV shows that use humor to assist a complex interplay between Hindutva descent, global cultural integration, and post-colonial language, class, and caste divides. So the use of humor as a medium of critique demonstrates a reliance on theatrical comedy as a means of negotiating post-colonial social rifts, as well as the messiness of globalization as a process that attempts to reconcile these interplays of cultural sameness and difference. And it is precisely at corporate theater or applied theater in the workplace that, and the ways it experiments with this idea of fun and humor through theatricality that I suggest invites us to examine in detail these tensions. So I'll offer for the rest of my paper a case study of a training that I think invites us to do this. So in 2016, the company I was working for in Pune scheduled a 3-city corporate theater training series on unconscious bias in the workplace. And the client was a pan-India collective of human resources employees called HR Shapers, which meets periodically in cities around the country to observe the work of various training providers. And the first skit was designed to focus on cross-cultural communication in the workplace, which is in recent years has become a big theme for diversity and inclusion training. And the company's requisite foreign or white actor was in London at the time. So business head Mohan Madgulkar asked me to fill in as an actor in the training. And so the first dramatic scenario that was done was set at 3 in the afternoon. This first skit that we performed was set at 3 in the afternoon at the Mumbai office of a global bank, where 3 team members were meeting for the first time to commence a cross-divisional task force. So what happens in the training is we would do a dramatic scenario, we would create it on the stage and do this role play, and then the employees would sit and talk to each other about it. So in the first skit, I was playing the role of Helen Davies, an American vice president in investment research who has been on assignment in India for 1 year. And my coworker Sonal was playing Meena, a VP in investment banking. And my other coworker Soham was playing Anand, a VP in sales. So the 3 of us are sitting to commence our first meeting together. And to give you a sense of how the scene opens, I want to show you, this is the first part of the scene according to the script, where I'm talking on the phone about my cleaning lady in rather problematic terms, and the Meena and Anand are seen on the other side of the stage speculating about my age and whether or not I'm married. So the 3 of us sit to commence our meeting. I enthuse to Meena how much I love her dress, a brightly colored kurta, then express dismay that a 4th team member is absent. And according to the script, I am supposed to struggle exaggeratingly to pronounce his name. Chen, Anand interrupts me. Chen and Wadwa. But trust my native experience on this one, Helen. It's a good thing he's not here. You need to be careful about people from that part of the country. And the audience is sitting kind of watching in silence. And after Anand suggests that another Maharashtrian join our team, I assure him that the group is fine as it is. Sure, Anand replies quickly, especially with Meena around. You know, Helen, Meena is such an enormous help. Mina begins mumbling her thanks before Anand cuts her off. Come on now, Mina. No need to be so politically incorrect. Time for us to be vocal about our achievements, like the North Indians are. I ask Anand and Mina if they read the project report I emailed the night before. Mina nods, but Anand admits he has not read the report because he had, quote, a very important religious ceremony to attend the night before. I ask Anand which ceremony he attended, and he begins murmuring to Mina in Marathi. He starts asking her, what should I say? What do you think? And at this point, the audience starts laughing enormously. The audience starts laughing as Anand stumbles out an excuse. I had to attend my son's threading ceremony, Anand finishes. The laughter grows in intensity, so much so that I struggle to contain my own smile. You see, Helen, Anand declares as if commencing a lecture, in Hindu tradition, when a boy becomes about 10 or 11 years old, and then at this point I'm struggling to be heard over the laughter that has now overtaken the room, I shout that we need to move on. And to give you a sense of another part of the script. So I announce at the end of the script that I've also planned drinks at the Hard Rock Cafe to celebrate our project launch. I gush to Anand and Mina that they will love the restaurant's cocktails, adding that my personal favorite is the, quote, Sex in the City. Mina, noticeably uncomfortable still, says that she might not be able to attend. Misinterpreting Mina's discomfort for social anxiety, I tell her not to worry if she does not have any clothes to wear. And I offer to give her something, quote, a bit more Western from my closet, to which Anand looks horrified and Mina silently bows her head. Glancing at my watch, I say we need to get onto the phone with London for another meeting, and the scene ends with that. So the audience debrief begins. The room is silent for a long time until finally someone in the back of the room says decisively, all of them need to undergo cultural sensitivity training. And as if a balloon of tension has been popped in the room, everyone breaks into laughter and gives a loud round of applause. And hands shoot up in the air and the first questions are directed at me. Why would you speak to your cleaning lady like that? You should have never commented on the way Mina looks. Why do you think Indians need longer lunch breaks? And this refers to the script material that I showed you 2 slides back, where I'm making a comment about how I think Indian people need longer lunch breaks because they're different, setting them differently apart from people in the West. And again, all of this was written into the script to show bias, right? And during rehearsal, I had been given a set of pushbacks, which actors in corporate theater in this company use as scripted reactions and lines to use when they're confronted about their remarks with audiences. And I responded to the questions defensively, sharing that I had, in fact, undergone cultural sensitivity training in the United States that prepared me to work in India. But the audience is definitely not convinced. An older man in the front row raises his hand and starts asking me why I scandalized Mina. And then the room shifts its focus to Anand, where several people ask him why he would make comments about North Indians in the workplace. Anand rolls his eyes and sighs. Oh, come on. We all know what North Indians are like, just how we all know these Americans, and he looks at me, never get married. And again, the room breaks into laughter and applause and side conversations. And Mohan informs us that at that point, we're out of time in the debrief, and we need to move on to the next scenario. So in her ethnography of the Indian IT sector, Smita Radhakrishnan argues that the software industry in India operates through a process called cultural streamlining, which produces a new class of, quote, Indian yet global professionals whose diverse cultural identities get molded into a set of Indian characteristics that are palatable to an international work context. But the opening scene for Unconscious Bias performed an inverse of cultural streamlining through using comedy to depict Indian and American culture as cultural opposites. Helen, as a character, is immediately set apart from Mina and Anand by disassociating her notion of time from an Indian propensity to take longer lunch breaks. Her expectation that Meena and Anand also should have read the email she sent the night before further accentuated conflicting cultural expectations regarding work-life balance. And these dramatized differences, these imaginaries of American and Indian culture, performed Indian and Western identity along an axis of tradition and modernity. If Indians possess traditional values regarding Hindu marriage, religious culture, religious customs, and family devotion, Americans are performed as secular, unabashedly ambitious, and shamefully culturally ignorant. And Western and Indian culture in this scene were further positioned along an axis of appropriate femininity that cast Helen as symbolic of the contaminating influence of Western sexuality. In her work on India's neoliberal transformation throughout the 1990s, Rupal Oza draws on Partha Chatterjee to argue that India's integration into the global market economy was accompanied by a resurgence of nationalist womanhood. And in particular, representations of what Oza calls the new Hindu Indian woman have become an icon of India's neoliberal modernity. And she sort of talks about the ways women's magazines and popular television shows depict urban middle-class women as simultaneously belonging to a transnational work imaginary and the cosmopolitan middle class, as well as being sort of the traditional caretaker of the nation. And women working in corporate India symbolize this trope in the ways that female professionals are often viewed to embody a commitment to India's economic progress through working for the global market economy, while also exemplifying conservative values of Hindu motherhood and daughterhood. And this brand of femininity, Oza argues, hinges on a disassociation of Indian womanhood from Western sexuality. And we see this in the skit where Meena and Helen perform two versions, one Indian and modern yet traditional, the other Western and culturally immoral. Meena's Indianness is marked in the script and in the skit by her Hindu bindi, her demure attitude, and Punjabi dress, and which was, again, scripted as her costume, right? And Helen's Americanness is performed through her overly aggressive working demeanor, her sexual promiscuity, she has a partner instead of a husband, and her unabashed love for drinks, like the Sex in the City. And Helen's insistence that Meena go to the restaurant and change her clothing from Indian to Western further exemplifies her as a threat to Meena's feminine values. And the scene transferred the anxieties concerning the dissemination of Western professional culture onto women's bodies and positioned cross-cultural communication within a framework of false essentialisms that fortified ideologies, particular conservative ideologies of gender and tradition in the workplace. And the scene also contained critical subtext about the politics of regional identity and language that permeate corporate India. So the session's location in Mumbai served as inspiration for Anand to speak in his native Marathi and critique North Indians as less hardworking than Maharashtrians like him, a prejudice scripted into the scene to educate the audience about regional bias. And it's interesting that he uses Marathi. As we all know, English language training is an ongoing priority for HR. And during my fieldwork, it was not uncommon to hear clients request that trainers relay the importance of speaking clear English and to implement voice exercises that reduce regional dialect. And scholars have worked similarly, have analyzed the ways that English as a language of global cultural communication signifies new logics of racialized transnational governmentality, what Raka Shom has called a new post-colonial recolonization of the body. So Anand's use of Marathi was interesting in that moment, and it was at once permissible because it manifested through a comedic aside, and illicit because of the contested nature of the local in spaces governed by the spatial, racial, and post-colonial rationalities of the global. And the audience debriefing also adds texture to this analysis by showing how the circulation of what I call a laughter of recognition invites moments of cultural visibility and validation in contexts circumscribed by organizational norms, which, as anthropologist Carol Upadhyay has suggested, present what she calls Indianness as an obstacle to professional advancement. And so Upadhyay writes, quote, software companies in India are invested heavily in fashioning socially acceptable subjects who are able to handle customers and cross-border teamwork, training them in the habitus and practices of the global corporate workplace, and often instructing them to manage or suppress their Indian characteristics and habits that are deemed inappropriate for this space. So Mina and Helen's contrasting femininity became more pronounced rather than resolved during debriefing. Helen was accused of dishonoring Mina's traditional values, while Mina was encouraged to stand up for herself against distasteful bosses like Helen. The audience's accusation of shame reinforced Helen's vulgarity and affirmed Mina's need for protection against the contaminating influence of Western sexuality. And we also might see how gender privilege works with caste privilege, demonstrated by the audience's affection for Anand. Anand comes across as enormously funny during the skit, especially when he speaks in Marathi and dupes Helen about his son's threading ceremony. Anand thrust Indianness center stage. The audience's empathy for him emerges from a shared recognition of his critique of Helen's authority and ignorance. Anand's threading joke further consolidated a sense of collective identity and group positioning through attuning the audience to the potential forms of caste or social capital that they might share with him. And at the same time, Anand functions as a dual site of identification and disidentification for the audience. While his character inverted media narratives of outsourced labor, which tend to position intercultural communication as a problem endured by Westerners traveling to so-called third world locales, this time Helen was the butt of the joke, right? The audience's discomfort over Anand's remarks about North Indians in the debriefing pivoted this appreciation to apprehension over the scene's problematic politics of regionalism. So the cross-cultural bias training provides us what I think is a striking paradox. Although it's perceived as successful by audiences and participants, what it succeeds at was not often what it purports to offer. Rather than teaching individuals to communicate across cultural difference, the scene affirmed certain appropriate norms regarding gender and class that reified corporate patriarchal expectations, while also providing temporary moments of comedic relief and transgression against the politics of language that circumscribe global corporate culture. And Anand's performances of regionalism consolidated a distinctly Indian, again quotes, identity, which affirmed stereotypes of American working culture, while also spotlighting feelings of humiliation at being asked to accommodate Western norms in the workplace. And I think it's moments like these that often transgress instrumentalist understandings of corporate theater as simply a didactic mechanism for workplace learning. And they show us how applied theater for corporate development partakes in complex forms of humor and political positioning, which sometimes invite employees to negotiate the hierarchies and cultural dynamics of the broader transnational work economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Sarah. Your presentation was nice and your findings are very interesting and useful for the practitioners in this area. Thanks for sharing your valuable time with us. Also, I would like to thank you all who are joining with us from Facebook. Have a small break and we'll be back at 6 p.m. with our valedictory speaker, Dr. Sanjoy Ganguly. Stay with us. Thank you.